A fat 17-year-old was sold to Mountain Man as punishment by her father. What he did next shocked. The saloon in Dustwood Gulch reeked of stale beer, unwashed bodies, and desperation. 17-year-old Isabella Merrick stood in the center of the room, her substantial 400-pound frame making her an object of cruel fascination for the assembled crowd of drunks, gamblers, and opportunists. Her father, Silas Merrick, swayed beside her with a whiskey bottle in one hand and a twisted sense of righteousness in his bleary eyes. "Here she is, gentlemen," Silas announced, with the theatrical flair of a man who'd clearly practiced this speech while getting drunk. "My daughter Isabella, the shame of the Merrick family. Too fat to attract a decent husband, too lazy to earn her keep, eating me out of house and home. I'm done with her. Someone take her off my hands. Hell, I'll pay you to take her. Consider it a punishment for all the trouble she's caused me." Laughter rippled through the crowd, cruel and cutting. Isabella kept her eyes fixed on the filthy floor, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. This was her father's idea of justice, to humiliate her publicly for the crime of existing in a body he found offensive, for surviving the beatings he'd given her when he was drunk, for being a constant reminder of the wife who died giving birth to her. "Come on now," Silas pressed, his voice getting uglier. "Someone must need a work animal. She's strong, I'll give her that. Load-bearing, you might say." More laughter. $50 to whoever takes her. That's right. I'll pay you $50 to rid me of this burden." Isabella felt hot tears sliding down her round cheeks, despite her best efforts to hold them back. She'd known this moment was coming. Silas had been threatening it for weeks, but the reality was somehow worse than her nightmares. Being sold like livestock, being offered as a punishment, being mocked by an entire room full of men who saw her as less than human. "I'll take her." The voice came from the back of the room, deep and quiet, but carrying absolute authority. The crowd fell silent and turned to see who had spoken. A man stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the afternoon sun, and even in shadow, he was an imposing presence. Jax Thornton stepped into the light, and several people actually took involuntary steps backward. He stood 6'7", unusually tall even for the frontier, with the kind of powerfully muscular build that came from years of hard mountain living. His shoulders were massive, his arms corded with strength, and his chest and abdomen showed the distinctive definition of someone who worked their body to its limits every single day. He wore simple clothes, buckskin pants, a worn cotton shirt, a leather vest, but he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing to prove and nothing to fear. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with strong features and dark eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He had dark hair touched with silver at the temples and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite. Several scars marked his face and hands, speaking of a violent past he didn't discuss. He was perhaps 35 years old, and he was known throughout the territory as a man you didn't cross, a trapper and hunter who lived alone in the high country and came to town only when necessary. "You'll take her?" Silas asked, his eyes lighting with greedy satisfaction. "Well, Wait, you didn't let me finish. I want $50 to—" "I'll give you $10, Jax interrupted, his voice flat and cold. "Not to take her off your hands as punishment, but to buy out whatever legal claim you think you have on her. $10, and you never come near her again." ever." The threat implicit in his tone was unmistakable. Silas, for all his drunken bravado, was smart enough to recognize danger when he saw it. $10, he repeated, clearly trying to calculate whether he could push for more. $10, or I walk away and let you figure out your own solution, Jack said. But if I walk away and I hear later that you've hurt this girl or sold her to someone who will, I'll come back, and you won't enjoy that conversation. Silas snatched the $10 gold piece Jax tossed him and shoved a piece of paper at the mountain man. "Fine, she's yours. Good riddance, I say. May she eat you out of house and home the way she did me." Jax ignored him and walked directly to Isabella. Up close, he was even more imposing, towering over her despite her own substantial height. But when he spoke, his voice was surprisingly gentle. "Miss Merrick, my name is Jax Thornton. I just paid your father to release whatever claim he had on you. You're free to make your own choices now. I'm offering you safe passage to my cabin in the mountains, shelter for the winter, and in the spring I'll take you to the Sisters of Mercy Mission in Silver Creek. They help young women who need a fresh start. But the choice is yours. You can come with me, or you can figure out another plan. What do you say?" Isabella stared at him in shock. She'd expected someone would buy her as a servant or worse, expected cruelty and exploitation. She hadn't expected this, a clear offer of help, with choices, spoken with respect. "Why would you help me?" she whispered. "Because nobody should be treated the way your father just treated you," Jack said simply. "And because I have the means to help. So, are you coming?" Isabella looked at her father, who was already turning away to spend his $10 on more whiskey. She looked at the crowd, seeing nothing but mockery and contempt in their faces. Then she looked back at Jax, at this dangerous-looking stranger who was somehow offering her dignity and choices when no one else ever had. "I'll come with you," she said. Jax nodded and turned to address the saloon one final time. "Isabella Merrick is under my protection now. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me. Anyone who tries to follow us or cause trouble will regret it. Are we clear?" Silence. No one was stupid enough to challenge Jax Thornton, especially not over Silas Merrick's cast-off daughter. Jax led Isabella out of the saloon to where his horse and pack mule waited. He helped her onto the mule, which was sturdy enough to carry her weight, and they left Dustwood Gulch without looking back. They rode for 3 days, climbing steadily into the mountains. Jax set a pace that was challenging but manageable, and he made sure Isabella was as comfortable as possible given the circumstances. He didn't talk much, but what he did say was considerate and practical. He explained where they were going, what to expect, and made it clear that she was safe with him. "I need you to understand something," Jack said on the second night as they sat by the campfire. "When I bought out your father's claim on you, I didn't buy you. You're not my property or my servant. You're a person who needed help, and I had the means to provide it. That's all this is." "But why?" Isabella asked, the question she'd been holding back finally emerging. "Why would you spend money and time helping someone like me? I'm fat. I'm useless. "Stop," Jax interrupted firmly. "Don't repeat the lies your father told you. You're not useless, and your size doesn't determine your worth. I'm helping you because it's the right thing to do. My own sister—" He paused, his jaw clenching. "My sister Hannah was built like you. Heavy set, as people called it, Our father treated her the same way yours treated you, with contempt and cruelty. She died when she was 19, and I've always believed the constant abuse contributed to her giving up on life. When I saw you in that saloon, being sold as punishment, all I could see was Hannah. So I helped. That's all there is to it." Isabella felt tears streaming down her face again, but these were different tears, not of shame, but of overwhelming relief at being seen as something other than a burden. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't know what this means to me." "I think I do," Jax said quietly. Jax's cabin appeared on the third day, nestled in a protected valley with stunning mountain views. It was a solid two-room structure, well-maintained and surprisingly comfortable for a bachelor's dwelling. Inside, everything was organized and clean, with handmade furniture and shelves of books that surprised Isabella. "The main room is yours," Jax said, gesturing to one of the rooms. "I sleep in the loft. There's a lock on your door if you want to use it. You should use it at least until you're comfortable here." Over the following weeks, Isabella discovered a new kind of life. Jax treated her with consistent respect and kindness, never commenting on her size, never making her feel ashamed or inadequate. He taught her basic wilderness skills: how to shoot, how to read weather signs, how to preserve food. He gave her books to read and actually listened when she shared her thoughts about them. He cooked meals and made sure she ate well, never counting how much she consumed or making cruel comments about her appetite. In return, Isabella helped manage the household, organized his somewhat chaotic system for tracking pelts and supplies, and brought a warmth to the cabin that had been missing since Jax's self-imposed isolation. They fell into an easy routine, both healing from their respective traumas, Isabella from years of her father's abuse, Jax from the guilt he carried over not being able to save his sister. "You're good at this," Jax told her one evening as she helped him sort through pelts to determine which were ready to sell. "You've got a natural head for organization and business. The sisters will be able to help you find proper employment in the spring. Maybe as a shopkeeper or bookkeeper, you'd be good at that." "You really think so?" Isabella asked, hardly daring to believe someone saw capability in her rather than just her size. "I know so," Jax said firmly. "Your father was a fool who couldn't see value when it was right in front of him. But I see it. You're smart, capable, and stronger than you realize. You're going to do well once you get away from here and have real opportunities." Their peaceful existence was shattered when Silas Merrick appeared at the cabin 3 months after Isabella's arrival. He was accompanied by the town sheriff and 3 other men, and he was clearly drunk and angry. "There's my daughter," Silas shouted, pointing at Isabella as she stood in the cabin doorway. "The one this man kidnapped. Sheriff, arrest him." "Kidnapped?" Jax's voice was dangerously quiet as he emerged from the barn. "I paid you $10 for your claim on her. You took the money willingly and signed papers releasing her." "Under duress," Silas claimed. "You threatened me. Everyone in that saloon heard you, and you took my daughter to this isolated cabin against her will." "That's a lie," Isabella said, finding her voice despite her racing heart. "I chose to come with Mr. Thornton. He's treated me with nothing but respect and kindness. My father is the one who beat me, starved me, and tried to sell me as punishment." "See how he's corrupted her?" Silas said to the sheriff. "Turned her against her own father. Sheriff Warren, you have to return her to my custody and arrest this man." Sheriff Warren looked uncomfortable. He knew Silas Merrick's reputation. knew the man was cruel and dishonest, but he also knew the territorial laws, and they were frustratingly clear on matters of paternal authority. "Mr. Thornton, did you or did you not threaten Mr. Merrick?" "I told him I'd come back if he hurt Isabella or sold her to someone who would," Jax admitted. "That's not a threat. That's a promise to protect someone vulnerable." "That's still a threat according to the law," Sheriff Warren said with obvious reluctance. "And Miss Merrick is still a minor, 17 years old. Her father has legal authority over her until she's 18 or married. I'm sorry, Mr. Thornton, but unless Miss Merrick can prove she was being abused to a degree that justifies removing her from her father's care, I have to return her to his custody." "No," Isabella cried out. "Please, you can't. He'll kill me or sell me to someone who will. Sheriff, please." "Do you have proof of abuse?" Sheriff Warren asked gently. "Witnesses who saw him beat you? Medical records?" "I have scars," Isabella said desperately, starting to pull up her sleeve to show the marks her father's belt had left. "I have—" "Old scars don't prove current abuse," Silas interrupted smoothly. "She's clumsy, always falling down, and she's lying about me to protect the man who kidnapped her. Sheriff, do your duty." The law was on Silas's side, and everyone knew it. Despite the obvious injustice, despite Isabella's tears and desperate pleas, Sheriff Warren had no legal choice. "I'm sorry, Miss Merrick, but I have to return you to your father's custody. And, Mr. Thornton, I'm placing you under arrest for intimidation and for taking a minor across territorial lines without parental consent." What followed was the worst week of Isabella's life. She was dragged back to Dustwood Gulch and locked in her father's house, while Jax was thrown in jail awaiting trial. The trial itself was a mockery. The judge, who was Silas's drinking buddy, ignored all testimony about Silas's cruelty and focused only on the technicalities of the law. Isabella testified bravely about her father's years of abuse, about the beatings, about being told daily that she was worthless and a burden. She explained how Jax had saved her from being sold to God knows who, how he'd treated her with respect and dignity, how he'd promised to take her to the Sisters of Mercy mission in the spring. A woman named Maria Santos, who ran the local boarding house, testified that she'd treated Isabella's injuries multiple times over the years, injuries that were clearly from beatings rather than accidents. Several townspeople confirmed Silas's reputation for drunkenness and cruelty, but it didn't matter. The law was clear. Silas had paternal authority, and Jax had taken Isabella without proper legal authorization. The judge ruled that Isabella must return to her father's custody, and that Jax was banished from the territory for 1 year as punishment for his interference in family matters. "No!" Isabella screamed as the bailiff moved to separate her from Jax. "Please, he saved my life. My father will kill me." "Your father has promised the court that you'll be properly cared for," the judge said dismissively, "and Mr. Thornton will learn not to interfere in matters that don't concern him. Case closed." Jax's last words to Isabella, spoken as they dragged him away, were, "Survive. Whatever it takes, survive. I'll come back for you." The beating Silas gave Isabella that night was the worst she'd ever experienced. He used his belt, his fists, and his boots, all while screaming about the embarrassment she'd caused him, the expense of retrieving her, the mockery he'd endured because of her. When he finally passed out drunk, Isabella lay bleeding on the floor of the storage room he'd locked her in, barely conscious and wondering if she'd survive until morning. But she did survive. And over the following 2 weeks, as her wounds slowly healed, she learned that Silas had a new plan for her. He'd arranged to sell her to the owner of the Golden Rose Saloon, a place known for its working girls and backroom dealings. The transaction would happen in 3 days, and this time Isabella would have no escape. Then fate intervened. A fire broke out in Dustwood Gulch's main street, starting in the dry goods store and quickly spreading to adjacent buildings. In the chaos and confusion, as everyone rushed to fight the flames, Isabella saw her chance. She slipped out of her father's house and ran as fast as her substantial body would allow, ran until her lungs burned and her legs gave out, ran into the wilderness with nothing but the clothes on her back and the desperate hope that she might find help before she died of exposure. She made it perhaps 10 miles before collapsing in the snow. A blizzard was moving in, and Isabella knew she was going to die. She'd traded one death for another, but at least this way she'd die free rather than being sold into sexual servitude. She closed her eyes and waited for the cold to take her. "Isabella?" The voice was distant, like a dream. Isabella forced her eyes open and saw a figure on horseback emerging through the blowing snow. It couldn't be. It wasn't possible. But as the figure dismounted and ran toward her, she recognized him. "Jax," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. "I'm here," Jax said, gathering her into his arms with that same surprising gentleness she remembered. "I've got you. You're safe now." How did you find me?" "Felt something wrong," Jack said, already wrapping her in furs and blankets he'd brought. "Call it intuition or divine intervention or whatever you want. I was camped just outside the territorial boundary, and I felt a pull to ride toward town. Saw the smoke from the fire, had a terrible feeling about you, and started searching. Thank God I found you in time." He got her onto his horse and began the desperate race to shelter. There was a cave system he knew about 3 miles away, where they could wait out the storm. Isabella drifted in and out of consciousness during the ride, awareness coming in fragments. Jax's strong arms holding her secure, his voice murmuring reassurances, the bone-deep certainty that she was finally, truly safe. The cave was cold, but protected from the wind. Jax built a fire, melted snow for water, and began treating Isabella's injuries with the medical supplies he always carried. The beating Silas had given her had left bruises and cuts that were still healing, and the exposure to the cold had dangerously lowered her body temperature. For 3 days, Jax nursed her back to health while the blizzard raged outside. He kept the fire burning, forced warm broth down her throat when she could barely swallow, and stayed awake most of the time to make sure she didn't slip away. He talked to her constantly, keeping her anchored to consciousness with his steady voice. "You're going to make it," he told her again and again. "You're strong, Isabella. Stronger than your father, stronger than the law, stronger than this storm. You're a survivor. Just hold on." On the 4th day, the storm finally broke. Jax helped Isabella onto his horse, and they began the journey not back toward Dustwood Gulch, but in the opposite direction, toward Silver Creek and the Sisters of Mercy mission he'd originally promised to take her to. They were halfway there when they encountered Maria Santos, the boarding house owner who had testified at Jax's trial. She was traveling with a priest and a territorial judge, a different judge than the one who had ruled against Isabella. "Thank God," Maria said when she saw them. "We've been searching for you both. Isabella, your father has been arrested. The fire in Dustwood Gulch. It started in his house. He was drunk and knocked over a lantern while trying to beat information out of a neighbor about where you'd gone. 3 buildings burned, 2 people died, and several witnesses finally came forward about his years of abuse toward you and others. He's facing murder charges now." She handed papers to the priest. "Father Benedict, show them the documents." The priest produced legal papers that made Isabella's eyes fill with tears of relief. "The court has made you a ward of the Sisters of Mercy Mission," Father Benedict explained. "You're officially under church protection now. Your father no longer has any legal claim on you, and Mr. Thornton has been cleared of all charges and is free to travel wherever he wishes." They reached the Sisters of Mercy Mission that evening. It was a substantial compound with a school, dormitories, workshops, and a small chapel. The sisters welcomed Isabella with open arms, offering her a safe place to stay, education, and eventually help finding respectable employment. But Jax didn't leave immediately, as Isabella had expected. Instead, he accepted work at the mission as a carpenter and general handyman. "Figured I'd stick around for a while," he explained when Isabella asked why. "Make sure you're really settled and safe. Besides, they need help with repairs, and I need something to do now that I can't go back to my cabin for a while." Over the following months, as Isabella healed both physically and emotionally, she and Jax rebuilt their friendship on more solid ground. She attended classes at the mission school, learning skills that would help her find employment. She made friends among the other young women at the mission, many of whom had similar stories of escaping abuse or exploitation. And slowly, with the help of the sisters and Jax's steady presence, she began to see herself as something other than the worthless burden her father had always told her she was. Jax, for his part, found unexpected peace at the mission. The work was satisfying, the community was welcoming, and watching Isabella transform from the terrified, beaten-down girl he'd met in that saloon into a confident, capable young woman gave him a sense of purpose he hadn't felt since his sister's death. "You saved me," Isabella told him one evening as they sat on the mission's porch watching the sunset. "Not just from my father or from that storm, but from believing I was what he said I was. You showed me I had value, that I deserved respect and kindness. You gave me back to myself, Jax." "You saved yourself," Jax corrected gently. "I just gave you the space and safety to do it. All that strength, all that courage, all that capability, that was always in you. You just needed the chance to let it emerge." As the stars emerged in the darkening sky and the sound of evening prayers drifted from the chapel, Isabella reflected on her journey. She'd been sold as punishment by a cruel father, bought for $10 by a stranger who turned out to be her savior, nearly destroyed by an unjust legal system, and finally freed by a combination of tragedy and grace. She wasn't naive enough to think her struggles were over. She would always carry the scars of her father's abuse, always have to navigate a world that judged her by her size. But she also had something now that she'd never had before, a sense of her own worth, a community that supported her, and the knowledge that she could survive anything because she already had. And she had Jax, not as a husband or a savior, but as a true friend who had seen her at her worst and her best, and valued her consistently through it all. That friendship, forged in crisis and sustained through struggle, would last the rest of their lives. Years later, when Isabella had become a teacher at the mission school and Jax had built a successful carpentry business in Silver Creek, they would tell their story to young women who arrived beaten and desperate, needing hope. They would explain that survival was possible, that healing was real, that the cruelty inflicted by others didn't have to define you forever. And they would always end the story the same way. You are not what your abusers said you were. You are not a burden or a punishment or worthless. You are a person of value, deserving of respect and kindness, and a future full of possibility. We know this because we lived it. And if we can survive and thrive, so can you.